Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. And this week, I'm going to be talking about Herk Harvey's 1962 classic, Carnival of Souls. Carnival of Souls follows a young organist named Mary Henry, who, after a street race gone wrong, becomes the sole survivor of a major car crash. Shortly afterwards, she decides to take a job as an organist for a church in Salt Lake City. On her drive there, the scenery is pretty empty. She's driving through dusty roads in Utah until she comes across this strange, ornate carnival that is far off in the distance. And it is this really odd sight. So over time, she becomes transfixed on this carnival and she just can't stop thinking about it. And meanwhile, as all of this is going on, she's also being followed by this mysterious, ghoulish looking man. And he becomes this unstoppable force throughout the film. No matter how far she goes, he is always nearby. So I find Carnival of Souls to be a very interesting film. It's not your usual horror movie. It has this almost dreamlike quality to it, and it's very atmospheric. And on top of that, it's also a pretty early example of an independent film. You see, Herk Harvey was a director for this small film company in Kansas called Centron Films. And they would mainly make these educational films or workplace instructional films. And in fact, Carnival of Souls is actually the first feature film he directed. And the inspiration came from when Herk Harvey was driving down that same road himself in Utah and saw that strange sight of the carnival, which is actually called Salt Air, off in the distance. And he thought that would be a perfect location for the film. And so when he got back to Kansas, he talked to his writer friend, John Clifford, who also worked at Centron Films. And he told him about this location and he asked him if he could write a film using that location as a set piece.
So I said, what kind of story do you want? And he said, I don't know, but I wanted to end up with dead people dancing in a ballroom by the Great Salt Lake. I said, sounds good to me.
And let's not forget the idea of making a film outside of Hollywood at this time was still very ambitious. If you remember in my video I made last Halloween for Night of the Living Dead, I mentioned that this was one of the films that kind of helped pave the way for these sorts of independent movies that were being made at the time. And George Romero actually had a pretty similar background to Herk Harvey, also working for a production company himself, only his was based in Pittsburgh instead of Kansas. And an interesting fact I heard from one of the commentaries, Herk Harvey said that the film that really inspired him and kind of gave him the feeling that he could make his own film was the first film of Robert Altman called The Delinquents. And apparently at the time, I believe it was 1957, Robert Altman himself was an industrial filmmaker. And so I think seeing Robert Altman, who at the time had a very similar background to him, had made his own film outside of Hollywood, I think it kind of gave him license to feel that he could make one himself. But the main thing that I really find interesting about this film is the inspirations that they were drawing from. Because in fact, the kind of films they were trying to evoke were those of Ingmar Bergman and Jean Cocteau, some more foreign art house directors. And so this definitely explains why this does not feel like your usual horror film. And watching it, keeping this in mind, you can really see these influences pretty clearly. The film features lots of imagery, especially the framing of close-ups that definitely evoke the kind of films that Bergman was making during those days. And meanwhile, as I said earlier, the whole feel of the film is just very dreamlike. And that dreamy feel was almost a trademark of Jean Cocteau back in the day. So for film fans like myself, this is not only a pretty cool tidbit, but also a really big selling point as well. However, when the film was released, it was mainly shown at drive-ins to a much more mainstream audience, I guess you could say. Not necessarily the demographic they were trying to make the film for. Drive-ins were more geared towards teenagers, and the kind of horror films that they were showing there were more like Tales of Terror, the films I was talking about last week. Roger Corman really oriented his film business around drive-ins. And so to put a somewhat more artsy, slower paced horror film into these drive-ins was not necessarily the best move. And so because of this, the reception when it came out was pretty mixed. There were definitely fans of the film when it came out, and it was really these people that kept the film alive throughout the decades after it came out. And it never really got another major theatrical release till I believe around 1989. And of course, in the years since, it's become regarded as this kind of cult classic, or even nowadays, it's kind of more seen as just a regular classic. But it really came out of all these years of being relatively obscure and just being passed through word of mouth. But along with this film just being a great testament to independent filmmaking, I think a lot can also be said for the actors in this film as well. And really, this film has two standout actors, the main one being the lead of the film, Candice Hilligoss, as well as the somewhat weird neighbor she has, played by Sydney Berger. They both especially give some really top-notch performances in this film. Way better than what you would expect from an independent film made outside of Hollywood. And one thing that kind of explains why she's so good at acting is Candice Hilligoss was actually a student of Lee Strasberg. He's pretty much one of the most famous acting teachers of the 20th century. I mean, some of his students include Paul Newman, Al Pacino, Marlon Brando. So yeah, she was definitely a very skilled actress. But like I said, for a movie produced in the 60s outside of Hollywood, there is pretty much a guarantee that there's going to be some bad acting in it. And yes, not everybody is believable in this, largely because several of them aren't actually actors. In many cases, such as in the department store scene, the people that Candace is interacting with were actually just the people that were working there at the time that they came in the film. And even though the acting in this film isn't always that great, it still works pretty well for this kind of movie. The odd pauses and deadpan delivery really adds to this otherworldly feel that the film is trying to create, possibly even better than if they had hired professionals to fill these roles. And you'll find that is really an interesting quality about this film. Even the imperfections in it add to the film in an interesting way. Another fun fact is the main ghoul who is following Mary, the main character, around throughout the film, was actually played by the director Herk Harvey. He never speaks in the film, and as you can see, he doesn't have to. He does a great job of just creeping you out, staring through windows, and following the lead wherever she goes. But there you go, Carnival of Souls. A really great film, and I think it'd be perfect to watch around Halloween if you're looking for something spooky. In fact, I think most people will probably find it somewhat similar in tone to one of the old Twilight Zone episodes. So it's really fun, really spooky, and really atmospheric. And so if you like to watch this film, it's available on several places to stream, such as HBO Max and the Criterion Channel, and you can also rent or buy it from all the usual places as well. And physically, of course, you see it is available from the Criterion Collection on DVD or Blu-ray. And from what I found, it's a really great set. It's got tons of bonus features. It's got some of the industrial films that Herk Harvey directed, and it's also got a few deleted scenes and some documentaries and things. Some about the Salt Air Pavilion that is prominently featured in the film, and another one in particular is a news story that covers the revival of this film back in the late 80s, early 90s. Alright, well, I think it's time once again for the comment question. And this week I wanted to ask, what is your favorite example of atmosphere in a film? I always find this film, Carnival of Souls, to be a favorite of mine in that respect. You know, that spooky atmosphere is something that I always really look for in horror films, and so I definitely appreciate when they are able to pull it off. So go ahead and list some of your favorites down in the comments section below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you like this video and subscribe if you want to see more. Be sure to keep watching movies and I will see you next week.